Way, more sessions are coming up, more interesting discussion and more interesting speakers. So I would now like to allow my colleague for the next session to take over. Thank you very much once again.
Session 2, please welcome Rector of Paramadina University, Dr. Anies Baswedan.
Hello everyone, we will continue this pop concert on the future. Me now pretending to be Lady Gaga. We wish we would have invented already something that would bring us coffee and make us pee without moving from our chairs, right? That would be helpful. So everyone's still comfortable in their little time machines flying into the future 30 years from now, or have some of us crash landed already? Are we in future shock? Because predicting the future, I don't really believe it. 50 years ago, futurologists had predicted that we would already be holidaying on the moon. And I am still waiting for this travel agent to sell me that ticket. So the main reason that I am here today is to prove to my 11-year-old son that I am not so past century. Because that's what he always tells me. I think of myself as someone from the future. I actually joined Al Jazeera because it's a channel of the future. I am very keen on Twittering and Facebooking, but then my son, his name is Agus, he's 11 years old, he looks at me and he sees me playing with my laptop and he says, "Mom, you're so past century." So that's why we're here today. Our mission today is to prove to our children that we are not. We are from this century. And I'm going to continue directly with the second session because we are running a bit late. And the second session is on power shifts, emerging economies, and the new world. And our first speaker doesn't need much introduction. We have seen him earlier already, dressed up as Justin Bieber. And I think we're going to sing a duet later on. I know he can do it because he's a great musician. He plays the saxophone, he plays piano, he plays the violin, but he's better known as the head of the Indonesian Investment Board, Pak Gita Wirjawan. The floor is yours.
Check. Okay, good. Good afternoon, everyone. I've brought some slides with me. In the first millennium, we had a dynasty by the name of the Shailendra dynasty, which was responsible for constructing and building the biggest Buddhist temple in the world. This was around the 7th and 8th centuries. And this is a building of magnificence, which is probably the only reason why a guy by the name of Richard Gere came out to Indonesia just 2 to 3 weeks ago. Then move on to the second millennium. We had a dynasty by the name of Majapahit, which was also responsible for basically driving governance in the right way for Indonesia and the greater region of Southeast Asia. The question that lingers amongst many of us young Indonesians is, what is Indonesia going to be doing in the third millennium? We became independent in 1945, and shortly thereafter, our first president, President Sukarno, had famously said You give me 1,000 people, I'll move Mount Semeru. You give me 10 young, bright, ambitious people, I'll move worlds. This is, I think, what's going to propel Indonesia the right way in the third millennium. I think if we take a look at the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be a shift in terms of how economies around the world will change. In the first 1800 years, Asia's economy made up more than 50% of the global economy, whereas it is looking more and more like the Asia's economy is going to make up more than 50%, whether it will be by 2045 or 2050. I can simply make reference to Jeff Sachs' prediction by 2050 in that the global GDP would have risen from today's 70 trillion to about 420 trillion US by 2050, of which Asia or Asia's economy will make up between 50 to 54% of the global GDP by then, which will be between 220 to 240 trillion US dollars, of which China, India, and hopefully Indonesia will make up a big chunk of that. We have heard arguments in favor and not in favor of China's becoming the most dominant economy in the world. But here, I want to talk about Indonesia. Recently, Standard Chartered has just come out with a report called the Super Cycle Report. It basically talks about where some of the global economies are going to go in the next 10 to 20 years. We know in the year 2000, the top 5 economies were the US, Japan, Germany, France, and the UK. Whereas in 2010, last year, the top 5 economies were the US, China, Japan, Germany, and France. And he says that in the near foreseeable future, there's going to be twice as many people who are going to be age 65 years or older than those that are going to be younger than 15 years old. So what we're going to be seeing is a flip of the pyramid, whereby the top side, which is inverted, is going to be filled with old people, and the lower side of the flip pyramid will be full of young people. But fortunately, at the rate that we are reproducing in Indonesia, at the rate of our own mortality, we're likely to be able to at least maintain our population or even grow at 1.2% per year and be able to maintain the demographic profile. Today, our demographic profile is such that 60% of our population is younger than 39 years old, 50% of our population is younger than 29 years old, and at the rate that we're producing every day, we will be able to maintain that demographic profile in that by the year 2025, we will still have those same percentages. This is fantastic. Fantastic as long as we infuse education into these guys. And this basically relates to the third part of my discussion. And that is about the vision for our country. Our country, the protagonist in an ASEAN context, and hopefully a protagonist in a much bigger context. A famous author by the name of C.S. Lewis once said, he's the author of many celebrated titles, including The Chronicles of Narnia. He says, aim at heaven. At least, if you don't get there, they'll throw in earth. But if you aim at earth, you will get neither. The Javanese way of saying it is, shoot for the stars. At least you can land on the moon if you don't get there. And this is about investing in the future, and the future that's going to be driven by the young people that are attending this event today. We have only less than 20,000 PhDs in Indonesia. China has more than 500,000 PhDs today. India has more than 500 PhDs today. And India produces about 1 million engineers per year and close to 1 million doctors per year. We're not producing that sort of a scale, and at the rate we're producing the number of PhDs every year, which is only 700 to 800 PhDs per year, you take a 20-year view until 2030, we will only have an addition of about 16,000 PhDs. Think about it. 16,000 on top of the current 14,000 will get us to about 30,000. Still much lower than what India has, than what China has. You think about a future where we want our kids and grandkids not to be selling coal, it's going to be tough. Because India and China are and will be producing larger number of educated people. We've got to take a view on certain things. And there's really 3 dreams that we got to think about making. The first is the dream of hard infrastructure. Today, we only have 350,000 kilometers of roads in Indonesia, whereas China has about 4.5 million kilometers of roads. India has 4.5 million kilometers of roads. We've got to be able to dream that in the next 20 years, at the rate that we're going to be spending billions of dollars, that we can create at least 150,000 kilometers of roads in the next 20 years, at least 150,000 kilometers of railroads, at least 1,500 gigawatts of power generation. The math is easy. If we accumulate our GDP starting last year at 720 billion to about 9 trillion in 2030, the accumulation of the GDP will be at least 60 trillion US dollars. That's a lot of money for all of you to make. And think about it. If you take 5% of that GDP, which is the theoretical ratio or percentage of spending on infrastructure, by the way, we're not at 5% yet. We're only spending 3% of our GDP on infrastructure. If we were to spend 5% of our accumulated GDP of 60 trillion US dollars, we would have $3 trillion to spend on infrastructure. And that money will be enough to build the kilometers of roads and railroads that we have to in the next 20 years. And that's going to make things happen in terms of our purpose of industrializing ourselves. We consume steel only at 30 kilograms per capita per year. South Korea consumes 1,200 kilograms of steel per capita per year. For any nation to be a modern nation, it has to be consuming 500 kilograms of steel per capita per year. The question is, what does it take for us to become a modern nation? What does it take for us to go from 30 kilograms per capita per year to 500 kilograms per capita per year? It takes the building of about 120 million tons capacity. And it takes about $1 billion US dollars to build 1 million ton capacity. Right there, we're going to need 120 billion US. We've got to be able to consume cement at least 400 kilograms per capita per year. We've got to be able to electrify ourselves at much larger than 565 kilowatt hour per capita per year. The numbers are staggering, and it takes the building of roads and all the other hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure, which I referred to earlier. That's education. That's healthcare. The third bit of the dream is the digital dream. Our penetration of broadband is only 18%. Much lower than what we have in Korea, much lower than what we have in India.